I think a lot of people are experiencing this where they get, brave and they go into TikTok. And if they do it right, they start seeing a ton of traffic for like really, really cheap. And you feel like this is Facebook 2010 or whatever all over again. And so that's great. Everyone's excited. And we have all these new growth metrics. But I'm also like, wait, let's see what these members actually do and how they behave in our funnel and how they activate. And are they really like a solid 12-month cohort?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this not the right? So like there's a little bit of that. And we are doing that post-op.
Welcome to another episode of the Hypergrowth Experience. I'm Nima Gardide, your host, and I'm quite excited about Vikas Hebbar, who's currently the VP of Growth Marketing at Tia. If you don't know about Tia, it's a women's focused online and offline healthcare platform. His past and experience as a marketer has been quite interesting to dig into. He's sort of started from product, has gone to brand, and now growth marketing, and has a bit of a stint as a founder as well in the middle of all that. So it was wonderful to hear him talk about his process and how it all made sense to him over time, especially if you're looking to hire marketers or having conversations with folks early in their careers. I think it's a very useful conversation to listen to. Seeing him having gone from extremely big brands to startups and the differences and the sort of complexities of how these things change, but are still the same to some extent, was very fun to listen to. And if you're into debates, we had a good one about how marketers are not meant to necessarily convince customers, or at least that is my take on it, or my position. And it was fun to go back and forth on that. And I think he has an interesting set of mindsets and models around giving career advice to other marketers. And so we start there. Here's Vikas.
Foundationally, I think I follow curiosity. And that's just been kind of like how I do a lot of things in life. So if something is really interesting and curious, I don't really stop to think about, hey, what is the big picture? What is the story I'm telling other people? It doesn't cross my mind maybe in ways that might other more practically minded folks. But I think when I do look at the connective tissue, it is that in every phase that I've been at, there has been sort of a growth imperative. So growing has been really, really important. From different phases, when I was in biopharma, it was still growing very fast. It was a bigger company, but we're expanding to new markets. We had new launches. There was a lot of fast-paced activity, at least for that space. When I was in video games, same thing. This was a company that was taking a whole new paradigm of gaming. This was Riot Games, and blowing it up across the world. It was really, really cool. And people didn't even know really what esports was at that time. And then, going to the bootstrapping your own thing, that's like the ultimate sort of, if you got skin in the game and you've got to grow it, and otherwise it's going to sink. And then being back in the sort of Series B area, it's all about growth. So I think that is huge in everything I've done. And I think the other layer of that is that everywhere I've gone to, and this probably speaks to the curiosity element of it, is that every place I've been at or try to do myself has been something of trying to define or shape or explore a new way of doing things. So it's not just growth, but it's kind of doing something new that hasn't been done in the area, or trying to challenge a convention or define a genre or category.
Yeah, and then I think that sounds very familiar to me, because that's kind of the only thing that has been constant for me as well, is just curiosity around growth and growing things, in the conjunction of building them. Because I come from an engineering background, but I'm curious why you recommend a different path to other people who are younger. Because I recommend your path, generally speaking, with the caveat that if that sounds scary to you, then maybe that's not for you, and you need to follow some like more linear path for what you're doing. But what you're saying to me makes so much sense, because I also, to some extent, did the same thing, where I was like, well, I'm curious about this area right now. I want to learn and get better at this thing. So I'm going to do this role or start this type of company. And that seems to be like at least way more fulfilling at a personal level than what I see some other folks go through in their careers. So I'm curious why you recommend a different path.
Yeah, part of it is, I guess in a way, when I talk to folks, a lot of times I like start with what I kind of think of as like the null hypothesis recommendation, which is what is the baseline? What is the thing that society sort of expects or ascribes for you? What is going to give you the highest probability chance of, having a comfortable life, of being able to provide for yourself, of, making it, of climbing up the corporate ladder, of all these things that are sort of the null hypothesis of how to live your life. I mean, I'm kind of like foreshadowing that I'm kind of casting it to be like not the ideal selection, but I like to have people think about, really critically think, like, why should I take these risks? Why should I go? There's already paths available to me that are probably a higher, providing a higher probability of achieving success, in quotes, and achieving, whether it's financial, career, supporting your family, however you define success. These are already there for you. And so I tend to have these conversations a lot with people. For example, I mentioned business school, who are like deciding to go into business school or graduating out of it and kind of thinking what to do. And I usually start with the first hypothesis, null hypothesis recommendation is like, don't go to business school. Why do you need to spend that much money and go to business school? Like, you can learn all this stuff for free or for much less, and you can get these experiences so much more readily and quickly, and maybe even more up-to-date education by avoiding this huge thing that I did. So I really want people to sort of challenge that notion and really just be like, okay, I really am going to choose this alternative hypothesis.
So it sounds like you're trying to recommend kind of like critical thinking instead of following a narrative. And so like, even if you're telling them to follow your path, that in itself is following a narrative, as opposed to like having some individual thought around what they should do with their life and how they should balance risk with experience and learning, and go for the type of success that they think is the definition of success, as opposed to what's sort of been given to them. I wonder if so the growth part for you, like you were in, is that bio pharma job your sort of first thing that you worked on? And it sounded like you were doing like growy things, like you were working on expanding the markets. Like, did you know that growth was going to be interesting at that point, or you just kind of took whatever was interesting and you kind of followed your curiosity at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. At that time, I don't think we even used that word growth. This was like in the 2000s. In fact, I remember some of my earlier conversations were to these, pharmaceutical executives, and trying to explain to them why we really needed a website. And so, again, imagine some of these folks probably worked for, some of these legacy pharma companies where it was really about, you do a TV advertisement, you do a magazine, a spread, and this and that. And like, so we were at some formative stages, but then it was growth, because you're talking about launching a new product and trying to scale adoption of that product by any means possible. Right. And so, and you do it efficiently as you can. And so that effectively is growth. It's just some of the channels, the analytics, the thought process and the frameworks were different and still the nascent stages. But yeah, that's where it was like, there's a new challenge. We have a new product we're launching in a couple of months. How do we get as many sort of patients aware about this product? How do we get as many healthcare professionals educated on this product? What are our channels available that we can use and be as efficient as possible? So yeah, I don't think we actually thought about it as growth, and it certainly wasn't. This was before like growth hacking, that term that shall not be named, that I just named, was a thing. But yeah, that was where it was. So now when I look back, I go, oh yeah, that's where I kind of got some of the foundations of this stuff. And of course, this was with like larger budgets and bigger reach than what I did afterwards intentionally, but it was the same thing, just a different scale.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So yeah, the vernacular has definitely changed a lot, and growth hacking is one that now is like frowned upon. But at the time when it got started using, I think Sean Ellis or Andrew Chen, one of those guys started using it, became like the standard thing, and everyone's like LinkedIn profile switched to growth hacker. All of a sudden, there was like a phase there. That did you? I'm curious. So have you been in a big organization like that ever since, or was that like the biggest headcount org you were working on?
Yeah, so that was when I left. I mean, I don't remember the specifics, but it was definitely over like 15, 20,000 people globally. So yeah, it became a big global company. And then kind of a similar kind of sequence when I joined Riot Games, which is when I joined in this interesting inflection point where we're still in these old offices where, there was cables hanging out the walls, probably safety hazards everywhere. And then we moved to this fancy new campus and exploded in growth. got acquired by a big Chinese corporation. And then that was a big company. It was not as big as Amgen. That was the biotech company I was in, but it felt like, okay, now we're a proper big boy company at this point. Like we have to act like one.
Wow. And then you worked on the League of Legends stuff, right? Like, so were you on the event side, on the esports side of it?
So I was on the community side. And this was one of those things where I had, I was working in kind of more traditional pharmaceutical digital marketing for a while, doing these kind of more big box campaigns and things like that. And like the obvious thing for me to have done, because I had ended that chapter or transitioned out of that chapter by going to business school. The obvious thing would have been to kind of continue that, but just maybe hopefully a step up in another pharma company or something like that. But of course, I did the opposite of that, just change industries entirely, follow my passion, which was video games, and move as far away from, running TV ads and, big time banner display campaigns and stuff like that to like grassroots community programs for video games. It was like polar opposite type of marketing. And that was one of those times where I was like, this is not only something I'm curious and passionate about, but this is like a hole I have. I don't understand this part of marketing, but I think I have some of the some sorts of skill sets and mindset that I can kind of ramp up in this well. And, the person who hired me believed in me, which was great. And I learned a ton. So we were doing a lot of sort of like program design, global program design to activate communities. And at that time, we called them creators, or we had different names for them, but they're basically influencers, what we call them today, to try to, bottoms up engagement, excitement, and amplification of our brand.
That feels a little early. I think now there is like a whole slew of both products and folks talking about building community. But you always have to feel like you got to look at gaming and in porn industries to learn what the latest things in marketing are, because there's like the hardest areas in marketing because it's extremely competitive. There's a lot to learn there, and so it sounds like you are doing community marketing that nowadays, or community-led growth has become one of the major channels of growth now. At least there's like a few companies have been built fully on it, where there's been like software around it, how to think about it. There's like different flows you can do, and then sort of follow the same experimentational model that everyone uses, but on this area of the space. Is quite interesting.
Yeah. But I would also add, in addition to marketing, those two industries, you can also learn a lot about analytics specifically. They have some of the most savvy data scientists in some of these industries.
And so you moved on from there. You started your first company, right? Or your e-commerce world. So why go from gaming to e-commerce, first of all? And why did you decide to start your own company and not continue on the path that you were on?
So yeah, I mean, the short answer is because it doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense for me to leave this company that I loved, where I got to work on this game that I loved with people who I loved, that had a ton of growth potential still. If I was going to advise myself, I would, of course, try to talk myself out of that. Accept the null hypothesis recommendation, stick it out. You're going to do great. This is why you went through what you went through, and et cetera, et cetera. But at that time, I had just gotten bitten by this bug where I just needed to try my own thing. And I felt like if I waited, I just would never do it. And I know myself, sometimes I can get just very comfortable in things. So I tried to kind of seize that energy. And so, I left that company and with a couple of my grad school colleagues, and we started these very, very simple, like bootstrappy e-com businesses in which we sold things like fashion, apparel, pet health products. And it was just a whole different challenge. I started in biopharma where we had these bigger budgets and we did these big campaigns, and it was a ton of moving pieces and et cetera, to these grassroots programs that we developed to kind of engage communities around the world, get them excited about a video game, to now I literally have like physical objects sitting in warehouses that I need to somehow convince people all around the country to buy. And so how do you do that? And I don't have the budgets that I had when I was in any of those companies. So we had to start thinking about growth in a whole different way, which is just like, okay, maybe we don't try to manufacture demand, we go where the demand is. And so we found places like Amazon, for example, where there was already a ton of sort of organic, for lack of a better word, demand for some of these products, optimize listings and keywords, use various other tactics at our disposal, such as email marketing, things like that, to really, really like guerrilla style, dirty, rolling up our sleeves, just eke out every sale that we could, kind of thing. And that was just a whole nother unlock for me in terms of like this area of marketing and bootstrappiness and scraffiness that I just had to develop, and there's skin in the game. So it's like you either develop it or you sink. And it was just a really incredible period of time where I think you talk to a lot of people and they finally, when they go to that phase, they're like, I learned more in that 1 or 2 years than I did the past 10. Yeah, that's not an overstatement.
Yeah, I think you build an appreciation for what it takes to make it all work. I think engineers have this problem all the way to marketers, in my experience, where there is like a lack of empathy for what it takes to make this whole operation function in the way it does, right? When you're in a slightly bigger company or even a startup of like 50 people, at that point, there's already so much work done to get you to a point where you are isolated from thinking about what it takes to get the office that you're standing on and make sure that like your payroll comes in time and you can email someone when things break, or like, all these things of like what it takes to actually run the company, all the way to what it takes to build the product or make it available to someone. I think people lose empathy over time, especially in these large companies. We work with some massive corporations where there is like 20 people involved in making the simplest thing happen, and they're also far removed from how the product is built and how everything is sort of functioning, that we have to remind the team on the other side sometimes, like, come on these calls with the customers, because it seems like you don't even know what you're selling, and let us like show you what they want, because we're the marketers. So our default state is let's at least talk to the customers and see what the products look like. But there is a lot of that, and when you build the company, you get that point of view. Do you feel like that now you think a lot more holistically about growth, and that like you care about the dollars in, dollars out way more than you did before this experience?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Not only do I feel like I got this sort of financial business strategy rigor, and also like a Pareto principle, I learned really what that means, in that, focus your energy on the things that matter, because you can't afford not to. And it's kind of flipped when you're in a big organization. A lot of times you're focusing so much time on stuff that actually doesn't ladder up to any meaningful metric. And so that is super important. And then also, like, maybe it's just, again, this is one of the silver linings maybe in my career path, is that for me, I kind of look at things like brand, community, growth, acquisition, retention. I see them all as like very closely related. They're all different they have different roles, maybe in terms of, if you think of how like a well-functioned marketing team, how they should work together. But like for me, I was very comfortable jumping and wearing these different hats. And because they're all kind of, if you do it right, they're all very connected, and they're all kind of trying to achieve ultimately the same thing. So I think that going through those phases and then having that sort of capstone project, if you will, of like trying to do my own thing, really helped me get that like full understanding.
I like that a lot. And I want to fast forward a little bit, because I feel like now I understand your sort of like basis as a marketer of like, you've been in a couple different places at this point. You now have like a sense of how hard it is to actually make these things work and build a company, but also how all of this is connected. So let's step back. I want to understand how you think about these different areas. You just said brand, you said things like acquisition. I think your roles were at points called growth marketing. And you said this phrase that I liked a lot. They're all trying to do the same thing. What is that thing that they're trying to do?
Marketing in general, like abstract, what is the sort of point of marketing? In my opinion, it's really connecting a super deep and real understanding of who your audience is, and then trying to convince them to purchase your product or service. And we can, tease that apart and kind of find edge cases where that might not be fully real. But maybe we're going to adjust some of those words a little bit if you're doing marketing for a nonprofit or something like that, right? But essentially it comes down to understanding who your customer or your audience really, really is. And so once you kind of abstract that out, you kind of think of like, what is the purpose of brand marketing? And so what are some of the things that brand marketing even does, right? We think about when you're working on a brand team, you think about functional and emotional benefits. You try to do segmentation, you build your brand promise, all these kind of things. That's all rooted in trying to understand who that customer is or potential customer is going to be. And so that's super foundational. And so and if you think about like what community is a sort of exercise in learning and responding, engaging with that audience. And so finding out what actually motivates them. And sometimes it's something as simple as coupons if you're in e-commerce or something like that. And that's a little bit of a cop-out. But a lot of times, like when you're in gaming, is developing like complex programs and incentive structures to get them to be advocates for your game, whether it's online or in real life, if you're playing in tournaments and things like that. And then growth is really taking all these things, these insights about your customers or your potential customers, and then activating them, converting them. And so all those things are really what they're all trying to do is take this like deep understanding of who these folks are and trying to get them into your world. And so maybe you can think of it as a baton pass or not, but they all need to understand each other. If your brand team is coming together with a brand plan and segmentation and benefits ladder and things like that, then your community team is talking to a whole different group of people. And your growth team is doing like really watered down messaging that appeals to everybody. You're just leaving so much on the table. But when they're all aligned, it's such a virtuous loop.
I want to push back on that a little bit, but convincing people to buy or use the product, right? I think we're pretty aligned. Let me ask you why you think you have to convince people. If the product is it is, and it's like a solution to their problem, what are you doing to convince them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think also I do want to say that some of this should be in the context of smaller, faster growing companies. Just the idea of being able to me have the audacity to say, I feel comfortable talking about brand and like helping develop a brand promise. And I can also feel like I could do community. That's audacious thing to say, but I think that these things, at least the way I see it, they are sensible when you're talking about a company that's growing, when you kind of have no choice but to think of these other things to some degree. When I was doing my own thing and it was me and my two partners, we did all this stuff and more, right? You have to wear all the hats at once. When you get to these larger companies, if you're working for a Disney or a big CPG company and stuff like that, some of this stuff may or may not apply in the same way. Like you have a team that all they're thinking about is brand. And if you get them to work on a growth plan and stuff like that, maybe it doesn't even make sense because you're not even thinking about growth in the same way, right? So let's just put that out there for one. So you're talking about a company that, for example, has pretty low brand awareness, and you're trying to grow. And then if you're a company that has low brand awareness, but there's a lot of competition, so how do you cut through the noise there? So I can have an amazing product. I can even have a great deal for the product, but the brand salience is not there. The recall is not there. People don't really associate with you yet. They're going to be super comfortable going to a Starbucks anywhere they go. Why would they go to, Nima's coffee? So that's why you have to somehow figure out a way to get them to be like, I have this association, this mental, emotional, functional association with the Starbucks in my life. And it's something I know, and I'm going to go there. Why should I then cross the street and go to your Nima's cafe? That's in a way an analogy of what I'm trying to say. So I have to kind of convince that person, hey, cross the street, come over here. What can I tell them to get them to do that?
Yeah, I think so. This is an interesting part. I think you and I actually maybe don't differ in that, but I feel that convincing part has more to do with the product development than it does growth and marketing. Because the way I think about it, and maybe you were aligned because you did bring up the bigger company thing, in that I think the brand definition and the way you position yourself, it just changes over time. And in the beginning, you're still not convincing people, in my opinion. There are people out there that want to just try out the new thing. And they want to be exploratory, they're curious, they're willing to give out new companies a try. And your job is to find those people. And then as the product team comes in and talks to those people, figures out really what their problems are and expands on the product's quality and its abilities, then as a growth or marketer or brand person, I'm going to then look at it differently. I'm like, oh, I have to now go after the next stage of the demand curve. And so then I'm going to change my perspective. And so I'm going to reach out to the other people that the product is not ready for and sort of like slowly go through this progression. So I think we're talking about the same thing. You're using the word convince. And I think a lot of marketers do. I generally don't like it. And I think like there is like plenty of like debates to be had about just this wording of this, but I think we're pretty aligned in that like your job is to find the right people at the right time. And if you do that well, I think you don't have to do much convincing. That's really all I think I'm saying.
Totally fair points. And I specifically chose that word because I know that's it's a little bit of a hard word for most of us to swallow. Like we'll all prefer other words other than that. And to be fair, this is an oversimplification, like I said, to some degree. We could swap out some words here and there and try to build maybe a more tailored definition of what marketing is for different types of stages of companies, categories, whatever. Or maybe there's some comprehensive one that covers it all. We can wordsmith it together. But I think one thing you brought up that was interesting about the role of product and marketing, that's a super interesting area. I think I would love to hear, other experts on this and, your discussions. I'm sure you've had many people on what that even looks like. I mean, I know that you are very passionate about org culture, org design. It's something that comes up a lot in these podcasts. And it's such an interesting thing. Where does the role of marketing and product begin? And especially as a growth team, a lot of us, like I have an open rec out for a growth lead. And like, you could look at that and be like, is this a product manager position or is this a marketing position? And like, I see mixed panel, I see all these other things that, product folks use all the time, SQL, so that is a very interesting thing there. Like, where does that like line in? And then the other piece of this is also like acquisition. If we're just talking about the sign up or we're just talking about starting a trial or something like that, that's one thing. And then activation. So like in my world, at least in a lot of recent, exercises and projects that I've been part of, marketing has been sort of like bring the horse to the water. And then the activation is getting the horse to drink the tasty water. And that's like the product team's job. Right. So, and sometimes you have a situation where it's like a freemium model, or you have some other like irresistible dynamics in which you don't have to do any of the convincing on the marketing side. You just find the right people, expose them to your messaging. They're in. Now it's up to the product to be excellent. In some cases, maybe we can talk a little about healthcare. In my current world, healthcare you're being bombarded all day with messaging around healthcare. It's very confusing. It's already expensive, even if you have insurance. And then now you have a service that's saying like, hey, healthcare, but you also have to pay $15 a month. So just getting that initial to the door, I have to do a little extra legwork to explain what the value even is, because it's not enough to just expose them to sort of what the brand is at that point. I have to kind of convince them.
Yeah, there is like I think that I'm also probably taking too strong of a position against that word, but the thought process is for me that the right person at the right time is what's very important here. And then it takes all of what you just said, like the right branding, the right community thought process, the right growth marketing process, all underneath it to make sure that not only are you bringing on people, but they're the right people and they're in the right portion of this sort of demand curve, given the stage of your company, your product, and your brand, right? And this part of I think we can spend another 2 hours just talking about what you just said, but I'm curious what you think about this part, which is basically historically at least, and still even now in a lot of cases, right? The marketing team is in charge of bringing essentially top of funnel traffic to a large degree, but really what that nowadays means is someone at least becoming a lead of some sort, installing an app, signing up for something, filling out a lead form, let's say first step in a funnel. In e-commerce, maybe it's a little bit different where people are going straight for the purchase, but in most complicated industries, healthcare being one of the most complicated industries, it's kind of an earlier part of the journey and the relationship the brand is building with the customer. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like that's a good idea? Do you think you should care most about the bottom line of the thing? Because ultimately that is what you want to really care about as a business, right? Dollars in, dollars out, and the dollars out maybe takes months to see, but you still have to care about it. And specifically in your current role, how does that work? There are, I'm sure, multiple marketing leaders in your org right now. How do you guys think about it?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And of course, the obvious answer is it depends. But beyond that, you're right. Healthcare is sort of a very high consideration purchase decision, if you will. And it can take days, weeks, months to actually from somebody to be exposed to you as an option and actually deciding to proceed with you. It's not that different from luxury fashion, which I was in as well, in which sometimes, it's 40, 50 different touches over 3 months to actually get the, convert on the $1,200 handbag. But of course, totally different aside from that. But in these cases, you have to sort of think about the funnel and what different organizations or teams, actors are playing around that funnel, and including like the bigger it is, the more you think about your own customers as advocates for your funnel and as a part of your funnel. So like more practically speaking, how I think of it in my current role at TIA is that we have, let's just like oversimplify the marketing funnel, right? We have like awareness, consideration, purchase, maybe repurchase or loyalty or advocacy, whatever. I see like our brand and PR teams, for example, really high funnel, like above the funnel almost. Like, what do we stand for? Why should you care? Why are we different? Those kind of things. And then I see our product marketing team as operating it towards the bottom of that funnel. Now you've signed up, like, why should you activate? Why should you book an appointment? What kind of services are available? How can we make you stick around? Connect you to others? Also thinking about referrals and all those kind of things. And this is not saying this is how it should be done. This is how we're doing it. And I would love your thoughts on this. I see growth as everything in between that. And so if I'm the growth team, we're getting all these hopefully great qualified eyeballs and interest. And then we have this wonderful product that we know is compelling, that we know is like a moment of delight waiting to happen. How do we get them through that funnel as quickly as possible? And so I'm thinking of it as like the simplest context is, the simplest way for me to think about it. And for me to sort of like think about what should my team care about the most? Like, let's have a priority stack is new members. And of course, it's not the end of the job. But if I'm going to organize a team that needs to focus on something that they can actually move, they're getting new members. And then we abstract a little bit. And I think about like sort of the marketing team as a whole. We think about things like members who get activated. Because now we're talking, are we bringing in the right kind of traffic that actually activates? Because if you activate within a certain time, you're more likely to be retained. And then you have more meaningful, LTV metric and a ton of other factors of your business get improved if you know that. And then if you abstract one more layer out as an organization, you think about LTV and lowering your CAC and all those kind of things. And that's where you have not just marketing, but you have finance involved in these decisions. You have maybe leadership and maybe even the board.
And do you think so new members is, actually, let me just ask you, what does TIA do? And then we can talk about the words you used, like new members and activation, what those mean in the context of TIA.
Yeah, absolutely. So TIA, I started in March, and TIA is basically a one-stop shop for women's healthcare, across primary care, gynecology, mental health, wellness. We're virtual and in person. And the kind of philosophy is around this idea of whole woman, whole life, online, offline. So really thinking of the current landscape for women's healthcare is very fractured, disjointed. Providers don't talk to each other. It's very confusing. It's expensive. There's just so much left to be desired in it. And I'm in a household filled with women. I have 2 daughters and my wife. My mother-in-law is a big part of our life, and my parents as well too. And I see these, like I see it with my own eyes, like how broken it is. And so TIA is an attempt to start to fix that and start to do this really important work. I mean, there's a term that our founder uses a lot, that women are the CEOs of the healthcare of the household, kind of paraphrasing there, in the sense that women make most of the household's healthcare decisions. Something like 80% plus of sort of the household decisions, and also how much of healthcare costs are really around female and women. And so it's just from a problem statement. It's just very, very compelling. I think what TIA is trying to do, and from a vision, it just clicked in my head. I was like product market fit in my head. And I mentioned this moment of delight before. If you just want to see it for yourself, there's so much UGC out there of women that go into a TIA clinic for the first time and just post it. Like, we're not asking for this. because the experience is unlike anything they've ever done before, ever seen before. And so when I saw that, I'm like, okay, they're doing something really special. And so how does it work? It's a membership model. So goes back to, when I was saying, like, how do I convince somebody to pay $15 a month or $150 a year for this membership? So we have to somehow reveal and convey that moment of delight and that value, and how this is completely different and solves so many of the issues that you so intimately feel and are aware of in healthcare.
And so you become a member, it's like a monthly subscription, and then there's more things on top of that. Is that what you call activation, or is the member moment of like someone becoming a paid subscriber an activated person?
No, what we define activation as like booking your first appointment. So, and specifically, we have kind of our flagship appointment. It's the Total Women's Health Exam. And it's like this multi-part exam that starts off with the virtual visit, in which it's like a download. The provider gets to know everything about you that you want to share, including things like, mental health history, like what's going on in your life. And also the whole idea is to kind of understand what does good look like for you, not having a provider say like, you need to be this weight and you need to have this or have that. Like, what is like you as a whole woman, like what does a healthy lifestyle seem like for you? And then come in clinic for your in-person diagnostics and appointments and stuff like that. So activating is really starting that process. And we see people that go through that process reveal the value of TIA and stick around.
Yeah. If I were to now zoom back out, like the growth team being more in charge of new members, which still does require you to become a pretty significant part of this flow, which is I'm signing up, putting my credit card down. And then the activation part being more on, and there's like a big operations part of doing activation. So it does make sense for that to be abstracted away to a different team. To me, with one caveat, which is you still are dealing with a quality problem still. Like I assume some campaigns, some approaches, some channels are bringing on paid members that are less likely to activate. And so this is the part that always breaks down for me, right? It almost is always like this, right? The ultimate thing that puts the customer in awe of your product, why they should use it, why they should become an advocate of yours, is still connected to the work that more top of the funnel folks are doing, but it's almost always disconnected in terms of OKRs and then how they care about it. And I have a lot of empathy for that problem because I understand it's like very hard. It's very hard to do it. Because as a marketer, you just do not have any control over some part, like a lot of parts of it, right? Like in this instance, like how well the ops team is run and how ready they are to schedule activations and all this sort of stuff. Like a very little control over that part of the org, I assume. And so do you personally hold yourself accountable to this like activation thing? How do you have these conversations about, well, of course, the quality of the traffic and the quality of the members that we bring in based on the stage of their life and where they are matters for this activation thing to work well. You do have a very broad product, so that does help, I would say, right? But it's not always the case. And so how do you think about that? Are there conversations around that? It's just so smooth selling that it doesn't matter. Maybe I'm completely wrong about it, about how maybe some campaigns or channels have different quality of member to activated rate or whatever you call that metric. But I assume that that's something you deal with.
Yeah, 100%. So just strictly speaking, if I'm going to be like, this is on my mid-year review or whatever like that, activation rate is not one of those things. So I'm not in these meetings, these leadership meetings and stuff saying like, this is how we've improved our activation rate. However, I feel a lot of ownership or involvement in that rate because I also feel like we, like to your point, should be driving traffic and signups from people who are more likely to activate. Like that's good for the business, you know, and we think about working together for the business. So yeah, so it's sort of like a slight cop-out answer to your question, but no, I mean, it's not like the thing I think of, and it's certainly not the thing I tell my team to think about on a day-to-day basis, but we're going to retro that. And if we run a campaign and I'm not going to tell them, okay, care about the activation rate because it's not a lever that they can really even optimize for that much, right? So basically, because once you're inside of our system, we don't have any event tracking or anything like that. So we literally can't optimize for that. But we can post hoc it. So if we run a campaign or open up a new channel, And I can just tell my team, we need to open up this new channel or my agency, and let's run it for a couple of months. And we start seeing like bonanza numbers. People are coming through like gangbusters. But we start seeing like huge drop-offs and churn in a couple of months. Like there's a post hoc that goes into that. And then I might make a call, even though for my metrics in quotes, we did great.
Mm-hmm.
They're not activating and they're churning. So I'm going to try to kill that channel to help that activation metric. And so we're actually like literally looking at that right now. We had a huge unlock this year with TikTok. And it was an interesting one. I'd love to get into it with you if we have the time. But, we got a lot. I mean, I think a lot of people are experiencing this where they get, brave and they go into TikTok. And if you do it right, they start seeing a ton of traffic for like really, really cheap. And you feel like this is Facebook 2010 or whatever all over again. And so that's great. And everyone's excited. And we have all these new growth metrics. But I'm also like, wait, let's see what these members actually do and how they behave in our funnel and how they activate. And are they really like a solid 12-month cohort?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this not the right? So like there's a little bit of that. And we are doing that post hoc.
Yeah. I feel for you because this is like a classic problem, especially in the industry you're in. There is a massive operations part that may be the blocker of the sort of the activation rate. And so it's very hard, at least in like much more obvious industries like SaaS. When I hear that the marketers just care about the MQL and they do not care about maybe the conversion of an MQL to like an SQL or a closed one, I get way more upset about that because like you do have control over that. Like it's not that bad, and sales staffs are much easier to scale up and versus like physical spaces where you have to have operations set up and support a group of members. We have something like 30-40% of our clients are in healthcare. So I really do feel your pain on that. But I'm glad there is like a thought process around that. There should be conversations around that in my opinion as well. And ideally you do have the data going in at least, although there is all this like recent thoughts we've had around healthcare data going into ad networks. I don't know how you guys are dealing with that, but that's something that all of our clients are reconsidering now. And yeah, I'd love to ask you actually, and you don't have to answer this if you feel like you don't want to, but you obviously send some signals to these ad networks, and that's healthcare information going to these folks. It's obviously anonymized, I assume, and you're not sending, here's the person and they signed up, but do you name your events to ad networks in a human readable way? Do you what do you do there essentially? Like I don't want to assume things. Just hear out how you think about it.
Yeah, that's a great question, and this is all in so much flux. We did a lot of research to like hospital systems and various healthcare companies, and to see like what they're doing and how they're doing it, and it's still sort of like the best practice, and all this stuff is in my perspective at least still developing. We are on the side of safety and ethical imperatives and all that kind of stuff. So we do just as little as possible so that we can give just enough to the ad agents to get people, ad platforms to get people to our site. So we are definitely like not doing anything. Like I mentioned, we don't have events in our member portal. We can't tie anything our external ad platforms are doing to anything that happens as a member. And our data security team's very, very like focused and intentional about like this line that bifurcates. Are you basically a visitor or are you a patient?
Mm-hmm.
And so like we define a patient as anybody who just gives us any information, even if they don't sign up to be a member. So once you're one of those people, we're very, very guarded with what we track or pass anybody. So that of course comes at the expense of certain targeting and a lot of things, levers that like a lot of other marketers can use in other industries, but it is sort of like the right thing to do, and we have to play by those guardrails.
Yeah, and I think the good news is, and if you're a marketer listening to this and thinking about healthcare, it's not as scary as you think. It is when you're don't have access to these events, because what happens is that you're in auctions with everybody else who also doesn't have access to these things. So you you end up playing a pretty like a level playing field with all the other healthcare companies. So it turns out that we were very scared of entering that market, at least because like one of the biggest things about our agency has been that we're very good at this data piece, especially for these more complex business models. But our healthcare clients, some of them are sending just like yourself a page view event at best. And we're pretty performant for them still, right? I think that, and then the process is different and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's an interesting world.
Do you find that with that has forced you, because this is kind of what it forced us to do, to kind of almost turn back the clock in a weird way and like really focus on creativity, on messaging, copywriting, like things like that, that because you kind of have to.
Yeah. We talk a lot about that, and a couple of examples we have of these at scale healthcare companies trying to acquire customers and still have like a decent cost of acquisition. Which, by the way, I assume you're looking at first party data and getting to some cost per member, but it's just that you're not sending that, to the ad network. So the way we think about it as an ad agency, and I think this is like, goes back to what I just said, like the thing that we've been always good at is recognizing that these ad networks are over time moving towards using machine learning for targeting. And what feeds into the machine learning are really two things. One is the event you send back, the signals you send back, which in this scenario we do not have. But the other thing is creative, right? That the way you design the creative, the way you structure the creative and how it goes into the platform. So how you split up your ad sets and campaigns, in paid social specifically, and on search, it would be around how you group your keywords and intent and things like that matters. And so, we just do a far more complex job at that part of the lever, which is like, how do we structure creatives in terms of production, messaging, and approach, and then how do we fit them into ad sets in all these different ways to make it so that we're teaching Facebook or TikTok, this is the type of person we want to see this ad. Because like, look at all these ads, they all look the same and they have the same vibe. And like, so we have like a persona in our mind, and sometimes we fit all of that in one ad set and sort of take advantage of machine learning overfitting. And so it's an interesting sort of approach, but effectively it's the same thing. We just decided to not use the event optimization as the signal anymore. And so you're going a little bit less broad, but using the same methodology. At least like that's how we think about it. But ultimately, yes, way more creativity is involved, I think, than before.
And it's fun. That's one of the things I've been in. One of the silver linings out of all the chaos that's happened over the past couple of years with tracking and everything in between.
Yeah, it's been definitely fun. I think we were talking about this. I think that the future of the industry is going more towards these two things. And so like the media buying part of our company, which was originally the biggest team, is becoming the smallest team. Because they put the ads on and they kind of don't touch it for like a week, because it's actually best practice to not touch it for like a week or two. And so they're spending a lot of their time thinking about the capital allocation. And so that's a totally different, I think, field, and they're learning how to think about data in that way. But creative and then the events that go back and how you think about the events that go back, I think are the name of the game right now. And it's just what works because this style of these ad networks.
Absolutely. And you said capital allocation. I mean, I feel like that is one of my unwritten job responsibilities is to really be a capital allocator. And, what that also implies is that you're a forecaster and you're, thinking about all these different things. Like, where is the company going to be in 3 months across all of our markets? And how should we allocate capital accordingly? And in a world in which, our old models of attribution are maybe becoming less reliable, looking for signals that can make us confident in allocating capital in appropriate ways is, I think, in a lot of ways becoming more challenging. I'm curious how you think about that, and if you've seen like a best practice, for example, like MMMs, if you are fortunate enough to have something like that, can be a potential bridge between attribution and incrementality, and can kind of give you a level of confidence, perhaps if it has enough data and you trust the model, to be like, this is where I should allocate, versus intuition, experience, and maybe even more old school attribution.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I feel like we can spend another hour on this one as well. But the way I like bucket these things together in my head is basically this, right? So attribution modeling, let's say like the old school one, right? People are clicking things, I'm tracking them to some extent, either directly or fuzzy matching. and saying, here's my cost dynamics. There's like $100 I spend in these 3 channels, and then $200 comes out, right? I think what that really tells you is, how are my current campaigns doing? Okay, that's kind of the answer it is able to provide. Incrementality in its sort of like very nascent forms without mixed modeling is kind of saying, asking this question of like, is my modeling correct? Right? Is my attribution model weighting things correctly? Right? That's kind of the answer it's providing to you, right? And I think you should be doing that stuff constantly, right? Just like run tons of incrementality tests, use the results to like reweight your attribution model, and then so you can like get a better sense of what your actual cost dynamics are and things like that. And then marketing mix modeling, which is actually super old, right? And for me, it's very new as well. I think I assume for you as well. It's just I'm quite grateful for people who remembered this thing existed and then brought it into our worlds. But it's from like the 60s or something like that. Answers a totally different question, in my opinion, which is, where should my next dollar go? And in this super world of like very fuzzy information, market level information combined with your internal data and what initial signs you're seeing in these channels, what the auction dynamics are based on like what other people are seeing. You can put all those sort of assumptions into a model like that. So then you can answer this question of like, if I spend another $1, am I going to get the same efficiency as I'm currently getting? And I think you and I had talked about this briefly around marginal CAC. Like, does it have the same power? And if it does, then let's do it. If it doesn't, then I have to go through a calculus of what is the equilibrium of spend, such that I continue to grow, but not lose out on capital that I could be using elsewhere in the organization or in other channels or in other forms of growth, right? So it becomes a pretty hard problem. I think only a handful of marketers in the world I know are doing it well. I would say we are still in the process of learning how to do it well. I do think it's where our world is moving towards, especially as we move away from a duopoly, right? Now we have Google Ads, we have TikTok, we have Facebook and Instagram. We have now YouTube is like a decent channel, right? And so Twitter, who knows, after Musk's purchase and Vine might come back, who knows? Now in a world where the mix is more important than ever, and also tech is now the standard, and so you're not competing with everybody else, and so I think this type of stuff is becoming very important to scale up. With that said, if you're only spending like $20K a month and are on like 1 or 2 channels, you give so much space. I think it's more important when you're kind of stuck in this space of, well, I'm spending a couple $100,000 now and it's getting pretty complicated. There's overlap between audiences, and I really have to think about it as like a hedge against the existing spend. Where does it go? And really, you're doing capital allocation at this point. So you have to become way more sophisticated at, I think, doing it than what we were doing before, historically, I think.
Yeah, that all sounds very, very right to me. And, you mentioned where this is where the world is going. I think a lot of us, especially if you're in the venture-backed kind of space, this year was a wild one, right? We all had to kind of figure out, what do we do with this new lay of the land, and how do we start to really think about things like profitability and all this stuff. And that's where, marginal CAC is now something that we deeply care about. And if I look at, on a market basis, each market that I look at has this inflection point. When we spend beyond a certain point, all of a sudden CAC starts to skyrocket at that point. So how do we gradually keep moving that inflection point higher and higher? These are things that we have like sort of no choice but to try to understand and unlock. And there's so many hypotheses that are kind of coals in the fire right now for us. But I'd love to kind of like, reconvene with you at some point and see what people are doing and how we're thinking, what's actually been successful after a year in this new world.
Yeah, and what I'm super curious about how you guys go through the next cycle of capital raises and what the markets will value. And I'm the one, like, in our company that thinks about capital markets in general, because I'm in charge of growing the company. And one of the things that we're highly indexed on is the capital markets, because we have a lot of startups that we work with. And it's the number one fear I have is it's just the unknown of how people will price companies and how investors are going to think about capitalizing companies in the next 2 years as the cost of capital is increased. Do you have already changed your mindset? Is it just a conversation at this point? What's changed so far this year for you?
Yeah, I mean, the headline is really, it's no longer growth for growth's sake. We can advertise or, think about membership targets and all that kind of stuff. Those are very, very important. And those do actually play into like a market that has a lot more members at some point hits a point of profitability faster if we scale the membership growth versus if we take a slower and more profitable approach. It might actually take longer to be profitable, if that makes sense. So sometimes it's worth it to kind of put an investment ahead. So you have like fed the market with a lot of customers who are going to start paying you back. So there's like a little bit of balance there. But I think beyond that, one thing that we are like really thinking about is our CAC payback windows, which I think we thought about a lot less before, because it was more like, we have this runway where there's a series XYZ ahead, whatever, right? And so we're going to get through it and they'll ultimately become profitable. We're confident of that. But now those things are becoming much more important. And we have to look at our CAC payback windows, and whatever we thought was like an aggressive window, it's more aggressive than that. Like what we're seeing in the markets is that people are very hesitant to like fund businesses that have these long CAC payback windows. It's too much uncertainty. And they're like, who's still out there that's got, and it's going to be business and category dependent. If you're an e-com business or a SaaS company that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure costs, it's not the same as if you're brick and mortar and you're hiring surgeons and doctors or whatever else, right? So, but with that said, even so, that's like a really big emphasis for us for now is like, how can we get our CAC payback windows shortened? What are the levers that we have to do that? But still hit growth targets so that we can get those markets like overall operationally profitable quicker.
Yeah, we're seeing very similar things. And it's great to hear that you guys are talking about these things. Like, interestingly, maybe something like 20-30% of our clients are not talking about these things, even though we're pushing it. And it scares me. It scares me for sure. And maybe they know things that I don't. And that's always like part of the equations of like, well, are so capitalized that we don't care about what you're talking about here or something different is fundamentally going on. But I'd love to, check in with you in a few months and get a sense of how, I assume lots went around to the data infrastructure of thinking about this payback period stuff and how you think about even activation rates may have become an important part. So I'll stop here and thank you so much for spending the time catching up with me on here. And I'll have you here sometime soon. We'll talk more.
I'd love to. Thank you for having me. Like I mentioned to you before, I've become a huge fan of this podcast. Love what you all are doing with this. This is really something special in a sea of various marketing voices, and just honored to be a part of this. And thanks. We got a lot more to talk about.
For sure. Thanks for that testimonial. We're going to for sure use it in the ad for this episode. I appreciate you. Appreciate you a lot. I've been mostly trying to do this out of curiosity and trying to learn from others, and it's happened to also help our company at the same time. But originally started because I just thought it would be interesting to use a platform like this to understand how people think about growth more. Just a general area I'm interested in.
Yeah. And just for the record, any new clients you get from that ad, that's $0 CAC.
Yeah, so, I had to do no work. It's just you showed up and I appreciate you. So much gratitude for you being here, and we'll see you soon.
See you, Nima. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening and being part of this experience with me. It's been a very fun year recording these. Special thank you to Leah and the team behind this for putting all of these together and helping schedule everyone in. These are quite long conversations we have with these growth folks and founders of these amazing companies. And this has been a really fun experience for me to really dig into my own psyche of what's interesting to me and understand how that can be interesting to you. So we've got a lot of amazing guests coming next year. It's starting to become a little bit more of a recurring experience here where we're recording something new every couple of weeks now, and people want to be on the show. So it's been really cool to see the show grow. As always, please follow or give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. These are the sort of general areas we're growing the podcast, and that would be the greatest gift you could give this year. See you on the next one.